Bang! Bang! Fire! Fire! Fire!
Hello everybody, Hooded Cobra Commander 788 here. Are you ready to rock? I held a poll on Patreon to choose this week's review, and Metalhead won in a landslide, or a rock slide if you will. While I was preparing for this video, I decided to review both vintage versions of Metalhead, so you are getting two reviews in one. Thank you to everyone on Patreon. Since Metalhead was in Destro's Iron Grenadiers, I thought I would talk more about Destro in this episode. Really, the connection to Destro was minimal. Instead, I discovered the best rock and roll song in the history of G.I. Joe. Get ready to bang your head! HCC788 presents Metalhead! This is Metalhead, Destro's anti-tank specialist from 1990 and Cobra's anti-tank specialist from 1994. We have two versions of Metalhead here, and we will look at both of them. Version 1 of Metalhead was released in 1990 and was only available in 1990. It was discontinued for 1991. Version 2 was released in 1994 and was available only that year. 1994 was the last year of the vintage G.I. Joe toy line before it was cancelled. Version 1 of Metalhead is listed as Destro's anti-tank specialist. That is the same job as Scrap Iron from 1984. Scrap Iron's specialty was listed as Cobra anti-armor specialist, but the file card says he worked for Destro. Scrap Iron had a few appearances in the animated series and comic book, but it was mostly forgotten a few years after the figure was released. What happened to him? Instead of getting a later version of Scrap Iron, we got Metalhead, who did the same thing. Since Metalhead serves the same function as Scrap Iron, he could have been a second version of Scrap Iron, but he is not. The character is wildly different. The packaging for version 1 of Metalhead had the Iron Grenadiers logo. The Iron Grenadiers were introduced in 1988 as Destro's army. Destro was Cobra's weapons supplier introduced in 1983. It was a popular figure with a black uniform and a silver mask. In 1988, a new version of Destro was released with a gold helmet and a cape. By this time, he had his own army, the Iron Grenadiers, and Metalhead was a member. Destro's army had vehicles, troops, specialists, and leaders. Originally, they were going to be an enemy for G.I. Joe's Battle Force 2000, released in 1987, but Battle Force 2000 was short-lived. Another Battle Force 2000 figure and small vehicle were released after 1987, but the team didn't really continue. As with Battle Force 2000, the Iron Grenadiers had a few new characters here and there, but phased out after a couple years. Version 2 of Metalhead from 1994 is just called an anti-tank specialist. There's no mention of Destro or the Iron Grenadiers. Why? There was no Destro figure in 1994, but there was a 1993 Destro figure in Star Brigade. G.I. Joe fans would still remember Destro in 1994, so I don't know why any mention of Destro had to be scrubbed from Metalhead's file card. Metalhead version 2 is a new mold, or at least half a new mold. We'll get into that. They specifically wanted to revisit this character and created some new parts for it, probably because of his popularity in the animated series. Instead of the Iron Grenadiers, version 2 was in Battle Corps. That was the main line of G.I. Joe toys in 1993 and 1994, as distinguished from the various subsets. Battle Corps got its name from a new talking action figure gimmick that was planned for 1993, which was going to be called Battle Scan. The gimmick was cancelled and the name was changed to Battle Corps. Some figures from other cancelled subsets like the Drug Elimination Force were rolled into Battle Corps. Because Battle Corps became a catch-all for G.I. Joe and Cobra action figures and vehicles, there were a lot of toys released under that banner. manner, and it's considered the main line of G.I. Joe toys in the final 2 years of the line. Version 1 of Metalhead was designed by Dave Hassel, with final presentation art by Dave Dorman. The Dave Dorman artwork was updated for the card art. Based on the pre-production art, it looks like Metalhead is holding a helmet, but it's not the helmet included with the figure. It was a purple helmet. It may be that in the pre-production designs, Metalhead was going to come with a purple helmet, but that was changed at some point before production. Oddly, the artwork is mirrored on the card art. You can see the crosshairs on the goggles are on the wrong side, and the knife is facing the wrong way. Alternative pre-production codenames for Metalhead included Salvo, a name given to a G.I. Joe missile specialist, Tank Buster, Tank Zapper, Squash Head Harry, and Heat Round. All of these are terrible names except for Salvo, which went to somebody else. Metalhead is fitting for this character. Metalhead is slang for a fan of heavy metal rock and roll music. The name Metalhead was later given to a G.I. Joe Extreme action figure, but that character is not related to our Metalhead. The name is just a coincidence. There were several G.I. Joe anti-tank missile specialists that did the same job as Metalhead, the first of which was Zap in 1982. Zap was followed up by the missile specialist Bazooka in 1985. There were also later versions of both Zap and Bazooka. He may not have been a direct counterpart to Metalhead, but a very similar action figure was Fast Draw from 1987. This figure had a missile system that was as large and as intricate and as complicated as Metalhead's. The most direct opponent to Metalhead would have been Salvo from 1990, the figure that came out the same year and took the name that would have gone to Metalhead. Working for Destro is what keeps Metalhead from being redundant, because the year before this figure was released, Cobra had a trooper with exactly the same job, the 1989 Heat Viper. By 1992, spring-firing missile launchers were standard for most figures, so you could say everyone was a missile specialist. Metalhead is most known for his voice-activated missile launchers, which the animated series really leaned into. We will talk about that at length in the media section. In short, Metalhead's missile launchers fire when he says the word bang. I have the full card back for version 2 of Metalhead. I don't have the full card back for version 1, but we can take a look at how Metalhead was marketed in 1994. There is a variation on this card. This card has the G.I. Joe logo horizontal at the top. Later cards had the G.I. Joe logo vertical on the side. Also, the file card on the back was reduced in size. It was closer to the size of a baseball card. On the front of the card, we have the 90s style card art with the red laser background, indicating this is a bad guy character. We have the G.I. Joe logo across the top, and above that, Cobra, the enemy. And then next to G.I. Joe, we have the Battle Corps logo. Metalhead, the anti-tank specialist, was number 4 in the Battle Corps series in 1994. It says, Tank Blaster shoots. We will test that later. Also, it says, includes 7 accessories, and that is sort of true as long as you count the 2 missiles as separate accessories. Behind the figure, there are some instructions on how to use the figure stand and the missile launcher. On the back of the card, we have the cross cell and a partition for a couple of the other subsets. We have a 90s style flag point. The UPC is cut off of this card. We have an advertisement for a couple vehicles. Then we have the file card. I'm not going to get too much into the file card right now because I will read it later. These 90s file cards had some of the features and accessories listed on the card, and I will refer to that list when talking about some of these features and accessories. Let's look at those accessories, starting with version 1, and version 1 has a lot of these accessories in a very light gray color. It may look white on the screen, but it's actually a very light gray, and that light gray plastic can discolor over time, and this is what it looks like. It takes on kind of a yellowish tint. Let's start with the helmet. The helmet is in that very light gray plastic. It's a bit large, maybe a bit oversized. It has some detail on it. Most depictions of Metalhead don't include the helmet. Even the card art leaves off the helmet. Honestly, this helmet is fine if a bit oversized, but most likely you will not put this helmet on on the figure. Metalhead looks more like Metalhead without the helmet. The next accessory is his pistol, which observant viewers will notice I failed to put in his hand before I started. Good job, observant viewers. I hope you wrote a comment about it. The pistol is in that very light gray plastic. The grip fits well in the figure's hand. It has what I'm interpreting as a magazine in front of the trigger, and it has a sight, and it has these protrusions on top which would kind of block the view of the sight, so I'm not sure exactly what those do. This is a fine accessory, but this is not the accessory he's most remembered for. Next we get to his backpack missile launcher, which the card contents call a backpack with frame. The backpack and frame are two pieces. They are both in that very light gray plastic. The missile launcher tubes slide onto these rails on the backpack frame. The backpack frame has some details on its own and a peg where it pegs onto the action figure. These rails on the backpack frame are curved at the top, so theoretically you could slide the missile launcher tubes up and forward, but I don't do that. I'm worried about breaking them. An alternative is to just slide the missile tubes on the top of the rack, and now Metalhead can have his backpack missile launchers in more of a forward firing position. The backpack missile tubes have some vents and some ribs and some ridges sculpted on. There is a radar dish on one side, that would be the left side when it's attached to the backpack. There are two missile tubes, and each one holds one yellow missile. These two yellow missiles are exactly the same as the ones that go in the leg missile launchers, which we will look at momentarily. They just fit into the tubes. They do not stay in well. There is no spring firing gimmick. If these were made later in the 90s, these would definitely be spring-loaded missiles, but not this. These are just static accessories. Before we look at the famous leg-mounted missile launchers, we have two other accessories to get out of the way. These black plastic tubes that connect the figure to the launchers. They connect to the figure on the back with these pegs, and the other end pegs onto the back of the missile launcher. These are short black plastic tubes. These are very standard for G.I. Joe figures, so there's nothing really special about them. The pegs on the back of the figure where they connect are really close to where the backpack is when that is pegged on, so when all the accessories are attached, that area can be very crowded. Finally, we get to them. You've been staring at them for this entire video. What the card contents call leg missile packs. There are two of them. They are both in that very light gray plastic. They are both the same. They each have a hole that fits in pegs on the legs of the action figures. These legs are rather infamous for breaking off very easily, and there is a variation. We'll look at that momentarily. These leg missile packs have a bit of detail. They each have a peg on the back for the black plastic tubes, and they each hold two of those yellow missiles, which we already saw. It's very difficult to see, but inside those launcher tubes there are a couple pegs and there are holes in the back of the missiles, so you should be able to peg those on, but in my experience, even when you press them on, they still don't stay in very well. These are his most famous accessories and were used extensively in the animated series. There is a variation on these missile launchers because there is a variation on the size of the pegs on the action figure. I'm going to talk about the variation on the figure a little later, so I don't want to go too much into it for now, but the size of the pegs on the legs was changed, so the size of the hole on the missile launcher also changed to accommodate that. Finally, we get to the missiles themselves. There are 6 of them, 2 for the backpack and 2 for each of the leg launchers. They are in yellow plastic. They are small and easy to lose. They just go in the tubes. They have no firing mechanism. They don't even have finger flick technology. Actually, that finger flick gimmick might have helped them stay in the tubes a little better. As crazy as this getup is, personal anti-tank guided missiles are common on the battlefield. For example, the FGM-148 Javelin is a self-guided, shoulder-fired anti-tank missile, but it weighs about 50 pounds fully loaded and ready to fire. Metalhead is carrying 6 missile launchers on him, which means he could be carrying up to 300 pounds on his body, not counting the pistol, the helmet, and the rack. Even if he were strong enough to do that, why would he want to? It's impractical. Now we get to the accessories of Metalhead version 2. Most of version 1's accessories were the same color, but that was an aesthetic choice. The light gray matches colors on the figure. Most of version 2's accessories are the same color because they came on a generic plastic frame. The purchaser would have to cut the accessories off the frame to use them. Because the frame was all one color of plastic, the accessories were all one color of plastic. I am not a fan of these. Metalhead version 2 uses the same accessories as 1993 Heat Viper version 2, but in different colors. Other than the missile launcher, Heat Viper's accessories were all reused from earlier action figures, so since Metalhead reuses all of the Heat Viper's accessories, absolutely nothing is new for Metalhead. As mentioned before, some of the accessories are described on the file card, so I will refer to that. The first accessory is this pistol in purple plastic. It looks kind of blue on my screen here, but I can assure you in person it is very purple. This was originally issued with the 1988 Iron Grenadier Trooper in red plastic, so maybe this is a standard issue Iron Grenadier weapon. The file card calls this a 9mm with built-in silencer. At least I assume it means this accessory. It could be referring to the sculpted on pistol on the leg. The artwork is not very clear. The next accessory is this submachine gun. It is purple. It has a magazine and a foregrip and a scope. The file card calls this a Cobra issued assault rifle with infrared scope. It doesn't look like an assault rifle. This was originally issued with the 1989 Annihilator, another Iron Grenadier figure. That time it was in black plastic, and it was just called a handgun. So far he only has Iron Grenadier weapons, which is a nice callback to his roots. The next accessory is this rifle. It is purple, it is very large and oversized. It has this drum magazine, at least that's what I'm assuming that it is, and a scope. It's very long. This was originally issued with the 1990 Rock Viper, which breaks the trend of Iron Grenadier weapons. This accessory got used a lot in many different colors. It is not listed on Metalhead's file card, but the Rock Viper rifle has a peg to attach it to the backpack, and this one does not have that peg. On the Rock Viper's card contents, this is just called a rifle. It is similar to, but not exactly like, the Heckler & Koch MSG-90 sniper rifle. Next we have the figure stand. It is in purple plastic. It is a standard figure stand, came with a lot of figures. This is something great about 90s G.I. Joe figures. They included figure stands, 80s figures did not. Next we get to this missile launcher. It is not purple because it was not on the accessories tree. It is red with a black trigger. The file card calls this an anti-tank computer-linked rocket launcher. It is really nicely designed with great details on all sides. It's really well done. It's designed to have the figure's arm go through this loop and to use the trigger as a grip, and for once it actually works. You can use it that way. For the missile launcher, there are two purple missiles. They were on the accessories tree. So let's demonstrate how to use this. To load the launcher, you just press the missile into the launcher tube with the notch side down. Press it in until it clicks, then it is ready to fire. We will use our old friend Dr. Mindbender for target practice. As shown earlier, the trigger is this black grip right here, and you just take aim and pull that back to fire. We took out Dr. Mindbender with one shot, so we didn't need our second missile, but it's nice to have the second missile. This is a gimmick. It was very popular in the 90s. Either you like these or don't. I can take them or leave them, but it does make a bit more sense since Metalhead is supposed to be an anti-tank specialist and should have a big missile launcher. With the accessories out of the way, let's take a look at the articulation for Metalhead. They both had the same articulation, so I'll demonstrate on one. They had standard articulation, so a ball-jointed head. They could turn their heads from left to right and look up and down. They could swing their arm up at the shoulder and swivel at the shoulder all the way around. He had a hinge at the elbow, so he could bend his arm at the elbow about 90 degrees. He had a swivel at the bicep, so he could swivel his arm all the way around. This was an O-ring figure, meaning the figure was held together with a rubber O-ring that looped around the inside, so he could move at the torso a bit. He could move his legs apart about so far. He could bend his leg at the hip about 90 degrees and bend at the knee about 90 degrees. Let's look at the sculpt, design, and color of Metalhead, starting with version 1. Version 1 had all original parts. Nothing was reused from earlier action figures. On his head he has black hair with a 70s style haircut covering his ears. The hair is sculpted this way so the helmet will fit on, but it looks like he has a hair helmet. He has a black goatee beard and mustache. This facial hairstyle is called a circle beard. He is wearing yellow goggles with red frames, and there are crosshairs etched over the left eye. This makes more sense than 1990 Undertow, another Iron Grenadier figure. That one had crosshair markings on the outside of his mask, which makes no sense at all. If the markings are outside of his field of vision, he can't use them. One bad detail on this head is the unpainted collar on the neck. This is a very unfortunate unpainted detail, leaving the detail flesh-colored. Looks like he has a deformity on his body. Looks like he's got some kind of fleshy sleeve on his neck. On his chest he has a black uniform with red around the collar and shoulders and around the back. At first I thought this was a black vest over a red uniform, but considering the colors on the arms, I think this is a black uniform with red panels like something out of Star Trek. Over that he has a light gray harness that's the same color as the accessories. There are straps over the shoulders that are nicely sculpted with buckles. There is a strap around the midsection that has some technical detail and pegs in the back. There's also a light gray knife on the chest just below the strap that goes across the chest. The handle on that knife is facing to the right. This is a really well sculpted chest with lots of nice details, and those details stand out because the uniform in the background is very simple, so this is nicely done. On his arms he has red on the upper arms matching the same color of red on the chest, and on the back of the upper arms he has what looks like laces in this lattice pattern. Based on the artwork I'm pretty sure that's what it's supposed to be, but that detail is soft and it's kind of hard to tell. The detail does continue a little bit down to the lower arms. You can sort of see it on the elbows, but again, that detail is soft. It's not very sharp, so it's not easy to make it out. His lower sleeves are black and he is wearing long black gloves. His waist piece is black without a lot of detail, no pockets or anything. Then there is this light gray belt matching the gray on the upper body and the accessories, and that has some of that lacing detail all the way around and a belt buckle. Oddly, this belt is missing on the card art. His legs are black, and around each thigh there is a band with technical detail. Those are unpainted. Those could have used some paint. Each one has a peg on the outside leg for the missile launchers, and this is where we need to talk about the variant. These pegs are very thin and break way too easily. My other Metalhead examples have one or both of the pegs broken off, and that is unfortunately very common. Later issues of Metalhead had shorter, thicker pegs which were much less prone to breakage, which is great, but if you get one of these you have to make sure to get the missile launchers that accommodate the thicker pegs. There is more lacing detail between the band and the knees on both legs that's unpainted. He has light gray knee pads with light gray bands around the top of his boots. He has tall black boots with red laces. Now let's look at version 2. Only half of this figure is new. The top half of the figure has a new sculpt. The bottom half of the figure is entirely reused from the 1990 Rock Viper. This isn't the worst reuse of the Rock Viper parts. The recoloring helps even though we lose some paint applications. Some of the details are more fitting for Metalhead than the Rock Viper. On his head he still has the black hair in a different hairstyle, maybe a better hairstyle. He still has the black beard and mustache, but in a different style, looks more like a full beard, partially covered by this silver headgear. He has an expressive face with a big toothy grin. Those teeth are painted white. This makes a bit of sense for Metalhead. He is a bit mad, but he's always having a good time. He is not wearing goggles like the first version. Instead, he has this silver headgear that's painted silver. It wraps around the back of his head head and over his forehead, and it continues down his jaw a little bit, and then he has this piece over his left eye. The file card calls this eye-implanted brain-integrated targeting site. So I guess this is a cybernetic implant now. I do like this head. I think it's a better head than version 1, if only for the better hairstyle. On his chest he has this large silver armor piece on his upper torso. It covers his upper chest and back. No real details on the back, but some technical details on the front. The file card calls this armor-plated laser-proof chest cover. That armor is over a uniform, and I originally called this color purple, but it's not quite the same purple as his accessories. What would you call this color? Perhaps a fuchsia or a mauve? I believe my mom had curtains this same color in the 90s. Whatever you call this color, we'll call it purple for now. He has abs of steel under that armor piece. Look at those abs. His arms feature long black sleeves and not a lot of detail on those upper arms. A little bit of straps and panel details, but not much. He has a silver glove on his right hand that goes over his right forearm. Looks like it has some armor plates on it. He has a black glove over his left hand that covers his left forearm that's unpainted. Looks like it has some straps sculpted around it. With the waist piece, we start looking at Rock Viper parts. It's that same purplish color as the torso. Not a lot of detail itself, but it does have this black belt and a black harness in front and an unpainted strap on the right side. That strap is supposed to go down to the pistol holster on the right leg. That is an unfortunate unpainted detail because there is a color mismatch between parts. Here's what that waist piece looked like on the Rock Viper. Very different colors, and the Rock Viper has this black blocky camouflage pattern. Also, the Rock Viper had that strap on the right side painted. The legs are black, which is reminiscent of the version 1 colors, but the legs are a different color as the waist piece, and that looks a little odd. Is he wearing black leg covers over a purple uniform, or is he wearing a purple onesie over a black uniform? On the right leg, there is an unpainted pistol holster with a strap around the right thigh, and of course that one that goes up to the waist piece, unpainted. It's not such a bad thing to have a black detail unpainted on a black background. That looks okay. There's an unpainted knife on the front of the right leg, and that actually is kind of difficult to pick out. A paint application there would have really helped. The left leg is also black, and there are these rocket details on the outside of the left leg. There are 3 of them. They are painted silver. They're very nicely sculpted. These are ammunition for something. The file card calls these anti-tank exploding rocket shells, which is fine. I just don't know which of his accessories is supposed to fire them. We finish up with some tall silver boots looking very goth with some armor detail on the front and some armored knee pads. The legs on Rock Viper look totally different with those colors. The Rock Viper does have those details picked out in paint, and that's especially noticeable for the knife on the right leg. Rock Viper does have those rockets on the left leg in a different color. Rock Viper should get credit for anything good on the lower half of this figure, but some of the details are better for Metalhead than Rock Viper, especially those rockets on the left leg. Metalhead at least is an anti-tank specialist, so it makes sense that he should have some kind of anti-tank ammunition somewhere on his body. Rock Viper had rockets on his leg and on his backpack, but he did not have an accessory that fired anything this size. Even though these details are better for Metalhead, this is another problem with the generic accessories tree. His one missile launcher shoots missiles much larger than this, and none of his other accessories seem to fit these rockets. Let's take a look at the file cards, starting with version 1. Version 1 file card has his faction as the enemy. That's not very specific. He sort of worked for Cobra, even though he was Destro's anti-tank specialist. There's a portrait of Metalhead here, and again, this artwork is flipped. The crosshairs are on the wrong side. His codename is Metalhead with a hyphen. This lineup here saying he is Destro's anti-tank specialist is the only mention of Destro. There is no biographical information, no name or even specialties listed. That will change with the version 2 file card. This paragraph says, Metalhead is a walking anti-tank weapon. Well, he's not walking very fast with all that stuff on him. He can launch high explosive missiles from his backpack racks or from his hip swivel holster tubes and guide them to their objectives on a laser beam without the use of his hands or feet. His voice-activated weapons command system is made up of circuits and targeting computer modules built into various components of his blast suit. All he has to do is make visual contact with the target, let the computer read the range, plot the trajectory, wait for the green light to flash, and yell bang to complete the firing sentence. This idea that he yells bang to fire his missile system is something the animated series used a lot.
Bang, bang!
This bottom paragraph has a quote. It says, "The real targeting computer is upstairs in his brain." So he keeps his brain upstairs, probably gathering dust in an attic. And it doesn't have an off switch. That'll run the batteries down. This guy is so wrapped up in his work that even when he sits down for dinner, he's preparing for battle. He tests his visual acquisition sensors by locking onto the mashed potatoes as they are passed from one end of the table to the other. He calculates wind deflection by observing how the steam rises off of the meatloaf. He measures the diameter of the green peas, seeing them as micro targets. What's he got against food? The Chef Viper's cooking can't be that bad. If he looks you straight in the eye, you'll feel as if you have a bullseye on your forehead.
Are you threatening me?
The first paragraph of the file card helpfully describes how Metalhead uses his weapons. The second paragraph is weirdly obsessed with food, and I think is a good example of why you should not write a file card when you're hungry. The first file card is a bit nutty. The second file card can't be that crazy. This is a 90s style file card, so it's no longer file folder shaped. It is rectangular with rounded corners. There is a smaller portrait of Metalhead here in the corner, and then a copy of the artwork on the front of the card with the accessories and the features pointed out. I've already read most of those. His codename is still Metalhead with a hyphen. Instead of Destro's anti-tank specialist, he's just anti-tank specialist. Now we have biographical information with Metalhead's full name and place of birth. His file name is Stuart A. Finlay. He looks like a Stuart, doesn't he? His primary Cobra specialty is tank destruction. His secondary Cobra specialty is hockey fight analyst. This raises so many questions. Does he analyze hockey fights for Cobra? Does Cobra have a hockey team? Or is this just some weird hobby or a second job? Maybe Metalhead has a YouTube channel about hockey fights. His birthplace is Annapolis, Maryland. Here is a quote, presumably from Metalhead himself. It says, "I'm always giving people the eye, the bullseye, that is, and I'm always giving people the shit, the bullshit, that is." This paragraph of text starts the same way as the version 1 file card. It says, "Metalhead is a walking anti-tank weapon." The rest of it is new. It says, "He uses the brain-integrated targeting sight implanted into his left eye to get a fix on G.I. Joe tank positions. His anti-tank rocket launcher then senses the target through bioprocessors in the handle and locks onto it like a cheetah about to pounce on a gazelle. All Metalhead has to do is yell fire, and the rocket blasts off with destructive accuracy." So now he yells fire instead of bang, but it's the same idea. Metalhead also enjoys skiing with the jet set on the slopes of New Hampshire. Is this the start of his personals ad, where he is known for cutting off other skiers, shooting at chairlifts, and being just plain mean? He is a suspected member of the secretive Susugar martial arts clan, and is obviously one guy you never want to see eye to eye. I've looked for a reference for this Susugar martial arts clan, but I've not been able to find it. Maybe this is a joke that I don't get. I have a hard time believing Metalhead is a trained martial arts fighter. There's a variation on this card that does not include this manufacturing information. This one says printed in Hong Kong, figure made in Indonesia. Some cards do not have that. And of course there is the smaller card variant that only has part of the text. Both of these file cards are insane. He's targeting food, he's yelling bang or fire to to shoot anti-tank missiles. He's being rude to people in New Hampshire. As nutso as these cards are, they do kind of fit the character of Metalhead. Looking at how Metalhead was used in G.I. Joe media, normally I talk about the animated series first, but I want to get Metalhead's comic book appearances out of the way because there's a lot to say about the cartoon. In the comic book series published by Marvel Comics, he had 2 total appearances. He first appeared in issue number 114 during the Benzene War, where he was working for Cobra. He single-handedly took on 2 Joe vehicles. He almost won, but ended up in a standoff with Dusty when the battle halted because the war abruptly ended. His missile system did not seem to be voice-activated. There was no shouting bang. In issue number 116, it was revealed that he was really working for Destro and was undercover with Cobra. He warned Destro that Cobra Commander planned to attack his castle in Scotland. Other than that, he did nothing in the comic book series, so let's move on to where Metalhead had a real impact on G.I. Joe. He did a lot in the animated series, maybe too much. This was the Deke era, that is the less famous series from the 1990s. That series has a reputation for being really goofy, and Metalhead is a big part of that reputation. He was voiced by Gary Chalk, who really leaned into it and had a lot of fun. That's a refreshing change from the unenthusiastic voice acting in the series.
Oh boy! In that case, can I do it? Can I hug? Can I please?
Metalhead was completely nuts. He would call out the range of his target and gleefully shout, "Bang! Bang!" to fire his missiles. Sometimes he would call out the range of targets just a few feet away, with no sense that firing would have blown him up too. Metalhead is responsible for introducing what may be the best character in the series, Granny. Metalhead's grandmother was a recurring character. In the episode Granny Dearest, she mistakenly thinks her grandson is a good guy fighting G.I. Joe criminals. Granny was a World War II veteran and would have done a better job for Cobra than Metalhead. If she worked for Cobra, they would probably win. Metalhead seems to have been a popular character and had a lot of appearances in the series. In the episode Long Live Rock and Roll Part 2, he used the power of rock and roll music through Cobra's sonic weapon to attack New York. Granny returned in the episode Metalhead's Reunion, one of the last episodes in the series. In that episode, Metalhead and G.I. Joe's Captain Gridiron go to the same high school reunion, and Metalhead brings his granny as his date. The Deke era of the G.I. Joe animated series went out on an anticlimactic note. The last episode was a clip show called The Legend of Metalhead. It recapped some of his earlier appearances. It starts with a new version of Metalhead's song in Long Live Rock and Roll, this time with lyrics. This has to be the best rock song in all of G.I. Joe. A lot of fans point to Cold Slither as the best song, but no, I say this one is better. This song slaps.
I am a mighty warrior. I feel my foes with dread. I love a lot of danger. My name is Metalhead. There's nowhere you can hide when I got you in my sights. There's nowhere you can run, cause I love my firefights. Metalhead, Metalhead, king of boom and bang. I blow things into little bits cause I'm a one-man guy. I'm a one-man gang. Metalhead, destruction is the game. Bombs and rockets on my thing and Metalhead's my name.
And that was it. The last vintage animated series went out with a tribute to Metalhead. This goofball was there at the very end of G.I. Joe as we know it. Looking at Metalhead overall, both figures are ridiculous and I love them. Version 1 is really pretty good. It's well sculpted. He has some classic Iron Grenadiers colors with some light gray thrown in for contrast. I like the head even with the hair helmet. The target goggles are fun. Really, my biggest problem with this figure is the unpainted collar on the neck. Unpainted details are not always a problem, but unpainted details on flesh-colored plastic can be grotesque. The biggest problem with this figure is the pegs for the missile launchers. The early thin pegs are almost always broken. The later thick pegs fixed that problem, but not before a lot of Metalhead figures got broken. In fact, it seems like most Metalhead figures have one or both of the pegs broken. You can't talk about Metalhead without talking about the accessories. Version 1 has one of the most unique accessory sets in the entire line. Even if you ignore the helmet and the pistol, the missile launchers are big and gaudy and totally impractical, so they fit the 90s aesthetic perfectly. Oddly, even though Metalhead is Destro's anti-tank specialist, he barely has any connection to Destro. He had one meeting with Destro in the comic book, and he worked for Cobra in the cartoon series. By 1994, the connection to Destro was dropped. The second figure is different but still good. At least it's crazy in good ways. The colors are a little wilder with the purplish color and the silver. The head looks even better than version 1, and version 2 does not suffer from the broken peg problem. It does suffer from unoriginal accessories. It does include a spring-loaded missile launcher, which makes sense, but not one accessory for this figure is original, and that's unfortunate. Great effort on the figure is undercut by lazy accessories. The importance of Metalhead has less to do with plastic and more to do with metal. This guy was the most unhinged character in the animated series, and that's saying something because there are a lot of unhinged characters in the series. He is simultaneously the best and worst part of the DiC animated series. I'm not going to pretend that Metalhead represents the best of G.I. Joe, but I also can't pretend that I hate it. I've gotten a lot of amusement out of Metalhead. That was my review of 2 versions of Metalhead. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share this video with your friends. That's what helps this channel grow. You can find me on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, and I have a website, HCC788.com. Don't forget important events coming up. Joe Fest is just around the corner in Augusta, Georgia, and after that, Cobra Convergence 7. Special thanks to my patrons who chose this review. Thank you guys. If you like the channel and you'd like to support the channel, Patreon is a great way to do it. You can get some special perks and some early access, and you can get your name in videos like the names you see scrolling on the screen right now. I'll be back soon with another vintage G.I. Joe toy review, and until then, remember, only metal is metal.
I love a lot of danger. My name is Metalhead. There's nowhere you can hide when I got you in my sights. There's nowhere you can run, cause I love my firefights. Metalhead, king of boom and bang. I blow things into little bits cause I'm a one-man guy. Cause I'm a one-man gang. Metalhead, destruction is the game. Bombs and rockets on my thing and Metalhead's my name. Metalhead is my name. Bye-bye, New York City. Hello,